Hi, everybody. Welcome to the People's Forum. We are a political education space and cultural center for working class internationalist movement building. My name is Tahia Islam, and I am on the education team here at the People's Forum. We're very grateful today to have Liz Theoharis and many other contributors for the book launch of We Cry Justice, Reading the Bible with the Poor People's Campaign. I just want to point out that we have books available at the front at our new Socialist and Revolutionary Bookstore, 1804 Books, available for purchase and ending with a book signing. We have snacks at the front and merchandise from Cairo Center. For those of us streaming online on YouTube, please use the Q&A as your way of asking questions and leaving comments. We're going to open up to Q&A at the end. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm going to now pass it to Lauren from Cairo Center.
Hello. I'm so excited to be here. We are so excited to be here to launch We Cry Justice. I've only been with the Cairo Center since February, but what I've learned is that so much of this work is represented in this devotional, as far as our broad network and understanding that this is a movement rooted in fusion organizing, which is organizing across all lines of division. And so we've got so much in store for you tonight. We have so much of our arts and culture represented, along with, you'll hear some words from our director in a moment. But as Tahia said, keep your questions in mind. Feel free to grab a sandwich. This is very much a casual environment. Feel free to come and go. But we really, really want you to dig in here and see some of the beauty that we've discovered so far. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce Sharon and Sierra, who will bring some of our arts and culture work.
All right, y'all, you know how we do this, though, in this work. We never sing alone, so y'all are gonna have to stand up with us. Now, the song that we're gonna start with is some of you may know it. We're gonna do a little twist on it and add in a verse around We Cry Justice. But I just wanted to say, as we're getting started and launching this book, that this book, while it's a devotional, is not about just reflection. It's about taking action. It's about grounding ourselves in the struggles of our people and crying out, because we know that justice is possible. And so as we sing this song, we're gonna cry out for justice. We're gonna rise up together, and we're gonna make the change that we know is possible. So we're gonna start with a little chant just to warm you up. And so all of this is an echo, so you don't have to feel worried that you don't know it yet. So it goes like this. We rise together, we rise together, we rise together, we rise. Your turn. We rise together, we rise together, we rise together, we rise. We rise together, we rise together, we rise together, we rise. We rise together, we rise together, we rise together, we rise. We cry justice, we cry justice. You try that. We cry justice, we cry justice. We cry justice, we cry justice. We cry justice, we cry justice. Little louder now. We cry justice. 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 Gonna do a little shout out to those on camera. Sing with us. Here we go. We cry justice. 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 So rise up. We're gonna rise up. Your turn. Rise up. We're gonna rise. You can clap too. Rise up. We're gonna rise up. Rise up. We're gonna rise up. Oh, rise up. We're gonna rise up. Rise up. We're gonna rise up. Rise up. Come on and rise up. Rise up. Come on and rise up. We ain't gonna let nobody turn us around.
We ain't gonna let nobody turn us around.
Because the people united will stand our ground.
Because the people united will stand our ground.
So rise up, we're gonna rise up.
Rise up, come on, rise up.
Rise up, come on and rise up.
Rise up, come on and rise up.
The powers that be can't keep us down.
The powers that be can't keep us down.
We cry justice and turn the world around.
We cry justice and turn the world around.
So rise up, we're gonna rise up.
Rise up, come on, rise up.
Rise up, we're gonna rise up.
Rise up, we're gonna rise up.
Oh, rise up, we're gonna rise up.
Rise up, we're gonna rise up.
Rise up, come on and rise up.
Rise up, come on and rise up.
The people are ready, so follow our lead.
Yeah, the people are ready, so follow our lead.
We'll put an end to the violence, the hatred and greed.
We'll put an end to the violence, the hatred and greed.
So rise up, we're gonna rise up.
Rise up, come on, rise up.
Rise up, come on and rise up.
Rise up, come on and rise up.
Now let me hear you on this we cry. We cry justice.
We cry justice.
Oh, we cry out.
Oh, we cry out.
We cry justice.
We cry justice.
Oh, we cry loud.
Oh, we cry loud.
So rise up, we're gonna rise up.
Rise up, we're gonna rise up.
Rise up, come on and rise up.
Rise up, come on and rise up.
Rise up,
Rise up,
rise up,
rise up,
rise up,
rise up,
rise up.
rise up.
Yay, back in the back too. Woo! Thank you all.
Good evening.
Good evening.
And good evening to the hundreds of people joining us online for this online, and then we got to gather also in person thanks to the People's Forum launch of We Cry Justice, Reading the Bible with the Poor People's Campaign. My name is Reverend Dr. Liz Theoharis. I'm the director of the Cairo Center for Religions, Rights, and Social Justice, and co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, and proud editor of this latest book, a book that does cry out for justice and that speaks to the issues, the real moral issues that are wreaking havoc in our world today. In a world broken by poverty, who does God call us to be? And what does God call us to do? In these yet to be United States, where nearly half of the population is poor, or one storm, one job loss, one healthcare crisis, one small emergency from economic ruin. We have a dominant, distorted narrative, one that blames the poor for their poverty. This narrative passes itself off as biblically rooted. But the good news of the poor proclaimed throughout the Bible rebukes political leaders and policies that degrade life, that divide us from one another and perpetuate the violence of poverty. Our sacred texts, as we see in this book, insist that it is poverty rather than the poor that is immoral, sinful, and can and must be ended. This beautiful book, with contributors, 33 different contributors from all across this nation, it demonstrates what it means to be devoted to the God of liberation, not a theology of empire, nor a system that degrades and destroys life. The chapters in this book are holy. They're sacred. They're embodiments of lives and a movement devoted to building a world free of poverty and racism, ecological devastation, militarism, and this distorted narrative. A narrative that blames poor people and immigrants and queer people and women and all people, really, for the injustice of this world, that tries to pit us against each other and feeds us a lie that God did not create enough, when instead we're living in a world of beautiful and amazing abundance. I want to call out the contributors to this book because it is an amazing and diverse group, part of the fusion movement that the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, is building in states across the country. We have folks gathered here in New York City, and also folks, contributors from all across the nation gathered with us online. So I want to read the names of these contributors and please lift them up. Lift them up in praise and in prayer, because folks are doing holy work. We have Solita Riley, we have Jessica Williams, we have Dan Jones, we have Melanie Mullen, we have Colleen Wessel-McCord and McCoy, we have Claire Chadwick, we have Idaline Luce Montes-Bobet, we have Tajay Beulah, we have Brigitta Call and Erica Williams and Stephen Pavey and Corinna Gore. We have Latia Frazier and Michael Pollack and Adam Barnes and Janelle Bruce. There's Leonardo Vilchis and Keith Bullard II. There's Aaron Scott and Becca Forsyth. We have Clinton Wright. We have Wes Daniels. We have Nick Lichetti and Kenya Torres Alcocer. There's Savina Martin and Tammy Rojas and Sarah Monroe and Tani Algood and Carolyn Foster, Marco Saavedra, and Noam Sandweiss-Back. Let's give some love, some appreciation to these beautiful leaders. And I encourage you, often we start in the beginning of a book, but perhaps you should turn to the end and read the powerful, powerful bios of these heroes and heroines who are the real prophets of our day. We have some other folks that are going to join us, share some contributions from these this beautiful book. If folks are here at the People's Forum, there are books on sale. If you're joining us online, you can go to the Kairos e-store and get this book. We're asking for folks to use it in your communities and your congregations. Indeed, we are crying out injustice. Before I turn it over to our next speaker, I want to read a little of the foreword from my co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, the Reverend Dr. William J. Barber II. He writes, "The title itself, 'We Cry Justice,' grows out of a phrase often placed on the lips of ancient prophets. The prophets were often described as crying out, crying loud, crying on behalf of God. This cry had at least two dimensions. One is the cry of weeping and hurt because of the conditions of injustice, poverty, and pain perpetrated by forces of empire and deception. Sometimes the prophets like Jeremiah would say, "Oh, that my head were a fountain of tears, that I might cry on behalf of Israel." Jesus, in the Gospels, is described as crying over the city of Jerusalem because it has left undone the weightier matters of justice and faith, choosing to kill prophets rather than to hear them. This sounds strangely similar to America today. The other type of crying has the characteristic of a shout, a piercing yell that cuts through all the noise of injustice and indifference. It is a blast, like a trumpet, sounding an alarm. God tells the prophet Isaiah to cry loud and spare not, to tell the nation of her sins. This is the way Martin Luther King Jr. and Fannie Lou Hamer, many others then and now, cry for justice. We have so many criers like this in the Poor People's Campaign. This morning, there were folks from different states across the country crying out for justice at the U.S. Capitol, saying that the needs and the demands of 140 million people in this, the richest country in human history, must be put at the center of our political discourse and our national life. And that indeed, when we cry out, God hears the cries and joins with us in building a movement of millions that can change, transform the very life that we're living today. I hope that folks do get this book and use it, and mostly many thanks to the beautiful contributors of this We Cry Justice, Reading the Bible with the Poor People's Campaign. I'm going to turn it over to Noam Sandweiss-Back, who I think is going to share a reading from his chapter. And then we'll turn to some of the folks that are gathering with us online who will also be able to share. And keep those questions coming and thinking about them.
Good evening. My name is Noam Sandweiss-Back with the Cairo Center and the Poor People's Campaign. Really proud and humbled to be a part of this book. And my reflection takes us to one of the most foundational canonical stories of liberation, of a liberation movement, I think, in human history, which is the Exodus story, and the beginnings of that story with the burning bush. The shepherd wanders far into the wilderness. Through the rust-colored granite, the sun casts a slanting glow. The mountain brush looks ablaze. He walks farther and is startled to discover that this is no trick of the light. A bush is burning. He looks closer. The flames are crackling, and yet the bush is unconsumed. He hears his name, Moses. He calls back with a question, and a voice answers, "I am the God of your ancestors. I know the pain of your people, those now held in bondage. I've come to deliver them to freedom. You will help." Moses is hesitant. He pushes back, equivocates. Finally, overwhelmed, he asks what he should say when his people demand the name of this God. In English, God's response is often translated as, "I am who I am." But the Hebrew declares something else entirely. Ayeh asher ayeh. I will be what I will be. The mysterious truth of this name gets clearer with each day. Moses is awakened. He becomes a speech maker, an organizer, militant. A whisper of dissent turns into a movement that swells across the enslaved multitude. And as this multitude begins to take action together, and as the promise of emancipation blooms, God emerges through them. God's presence expands as their action intensifies, and they are emboldened through this renewed relationship with the divine. After much struggle, they make a break for freedom and arrive at the shores of a great sea, an impassable expanse ahead and only death behind. They are trapped. The rabbinical commentary teaches that as the prospect of escape dwindles, one among them, an elder, walks into the sea until the salty water nearly fills his nostrils. Only then, on the edge of the man's last breath, does God split the waters. Here is the truth of the name. God becomes as the people, poor, dispossessed, divided, become. God will be as the people will be. And when the Israelites arrive on the other side of the sea, it is no coincidence that they go to the mountain of the burning bush. They arrive on its dusty slopes to begin a new covenant with God and construct a social order founded on justice. Perhaps, while camping there, they again see a bush on fire and glimpse within it their own becoming. Perhaps they hear a voice reminding them that the kind of revolutionary action they have taken has always been synonymous with the very name of God.
Thank you so much. Beautiful. We're going to move online to Dr. Tajay Beulah. Welcome so much. Thanks for being here, and thanks for all that you do.
Thanks for having me, Reverend Liz. Going to be brief. I am overcoming a sinus infection and laryngitis, and if I speak too long, you will be subjected to my hacking, and I want to spare you that. I just want to thank Reverend Liz for this invitation to work with the Leviticus text. As a Black bisexual woman, Leviticus is often reduced to one scripture, that is 18:25. And this was a beautiful opportunity to look at, to think through ways that we can reconsider how to use this particular text, the Leviticus text, towards our fight towards ending poverty in the U.S. Leviticus 25, 8 through 55 outlines God's ordination of the year of Jubilee. Essentially, the Jubilee insists that the wealthy pay a fair share of taxes for the economic benefit of all in society, especially the poor. Several times throughout the passage, the wealthy are instructed with the phrase, if any of your kin fall into difficulty. Following that phrase comes a list of duties to be performed on behalf of those in need. The Leviticus passage has significant implications for us today, especially for our understanding of U.S. history. Our resources come from God, and so we have a duty to provide for all God's people. At the same time, this scripture helps us to understand why poverty exists and has existed in the United States. To start, the United States does not insist that the wealthy pay a fair share of taxes to accommodate the needs of everyone in our society. Capitalism encourages the rich to get richer, and inevitably, the poor become poorer. Yet, it is the poor who ultimately push this society to become meaningful and transformative, as Ella Baker believed it could be. Poor people, not the wealthy, are the ones who organize when their kin, that is, other human beings, fall into difficulty. Leviticus puts it simply: society as a whole should make provisions for the poor. U.S. history shows us that poor people make provisions for themselves and for one another. They know how to provide for the kin among us who struggle against enormous odds. Perhaps the key to Jubilee in the United States is to look to the poor, not to the wealthy, for leadership.
It's just beautiful. I next want to introduce and appreciate Carolyn Jean Foster out of Alabama. Welcome this evening and welcome always.
Thank you, Reverend Liz. I can't tell you how Excited I am to be a part of this process and to be invited to be a part of writing, contributing to this wonderful book. I'm looking forward to sharing it with, I guess all my family know what they're getting for Christmas. So thank you. My chapter is chapter 50, entitled Band-Aids or Justice. And the scripture that undergirds my reflection comes from Jeremiah 6. I learned early in life that the place where you live matters. I grew up in a neighborhood called Smithfield, a few miles west of downtown Birmingham, Alabama. It was the Black side of town. Many of the students who participated in the 1963 Children's March, organized by Reverend James Bevel, an advisor to Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, lived in the neighborhood. Smithfield became known as Dynamite Hill because it was frequently the target of bombings by the Ku Klux Klan. Back then, the place where you lived, especially for African Americans, was dictated by the powers of segregationists and systemic injustices like racism and poverty. The ravages of segregation and the tentacles of poverty that it caused still have a firm grip on many communities of color. Where you live dictates educational resources, access to public transportation and healthcare, and employment opportunities. Where you live determines whether you can easily obtain fresh fruits and vegetables, and whether you breathe fresh air or have clean water flowing from your kitchen tap. Where you live determines whether you can easily exercise your right to vote. Place matters. The experience of living in a segregated neighborhood that was terrorized by white supremacists led to my work as a social justice advocate, community organizer, and anti-racism workshop facilitator. I work every day with people who are victims of systemic racism and poverty. Some live in poor housing conditions, breathe toxic air, and lack public transportation to get to doctor's appointments or other essential services. They disproportionately suffer from asthma, bronchitis, hypertension, and diabetes because they live in neighborhoods surrounded by industrial plants that produce toxic fumes and soil contaminants. Place matters, and the people who live in those places matter too.
Amen. Thank you so much, Reverend Carolyn, and thank you for your leadership in the Alabama Poor People's Campaign. Next, I want to introduce and thank very publicly Dr. Colleen Wetzel-McCoy, who provided untold hours of editing and contributing and gathering and herding all of the 33 contributing cats to this powerful edition. And so, Dr. Colleen, thank you for your contributions and for your constant pulling together of people and making sure that all of these beautiful voices are included.
Well, hey y'all, it's good to be with you. We are very cool cats, but we are a bunch of cats. And so I'm gonna echo that metaphor. Tonight I get to be a contributor. And so I'm gonna read from Of the Poor for the Poor. And it starts with a passage from Johnny Tillman, who was the first president of the National Welfare Rights Organization in the late 1960s. She said, organizations like ours could not continue to depend on grants and other resources from foundations at a time when everyone is caught in the economic squeeze and governmental repression that exists in this nation today. The types of organizing that the National Welfare Rights Organization continues to wage against the nation's oppressive institutions almost requires us to be self-sufficient, because too many of those foundations and funding groups are running scared, too scared to deal with us. So read Johnny Tillman next to 2 Corinthians 8, where Paul writes about poor people sharing what little they have with other poor people. And the collection, as this fund has been called, was money raised by the early Jesus communities throughout the Roman Empire. And Paul writes about this collection for the poor in almost all of his letters. So we know it's something that's really important to him in his ministry. The Roman Empire wanted the nations it had conquered to be divided against one another and united only in their obedience to Caesar. If the empire could keep them separate, it could keep them in check. So money was collected and sent to Caesar and his elites, more money than people could afford to send, and people were left starving. But the collection that Paul talks about is quite the opposite. It's a way for the poor to build a movement that brings together all the nations under God's laws of equality and all having what they need. And it was a way to fund the building of a movement in defiance of the ruling Roman Empire. In 1966, the National Welfare Rights Organization came together out of local chapters of mothers who helped each other navigate the welfare system. They'd share experiences with getting a welfare case reinstated or handling different social workers. As they grew in number, they were able to take on bigger and bigger campaigns and start to impact welfare policy for the whole country. At its height, NWRO, led by Black women, was the largest organization of poor people in the United States, organizing poor moms across the dividing lines of race and ethnicity. Johnny Tillman, as the first chairperson, developed an organizing model that didn't rely on funders who often called the shots on what work organizations could do. Even though they were poor, their unity was a force to be reckoned with.
Amazing. And we have one more contributor to be able to share some words with us, and that's many thanks to Aaron Scott coming to us from Washington. I should say that we have Dr. Tajay in Ohio, Reverend Carolyn in Alabama, Dr. Colleen in Arizona, and Aaron, you're out there out in Washington, and thank you so much for all that you do and for being a part of this powerful project.
Thanks so much for having me, everybody. Grateful to be here. I based my reflection on a verse from Isaiah 5, and it's 8 through 10. Woe to you who add house to house and join field to field till no space is left and you live alone in the land. The Lord Almighty has declared in my hearing, surely the great houses will become desolate, the fine mansions left without occupants. In Aberdeen, Washington, where I work, the Public Works Department demolished the city's largest homeless encampment. And while there's plenty of vitriol toward unhoused people in Aberdeen and nationwide, an encampment sweep is the kind of brutality that city officials are good at making sound mundane. Their rhetoric gets couched in terms of public safety or public nuisance or taxpayer concerns. The big headache for the mayor. It's a real eyesore that somebody's got to clean up. We've got to keep attracting tourism to the area, blah, blah, blah. The boringness of this rhetoric intentionally obscures the violence. What is the demolition of a homeless camp like? To the mayor, it is a PR stunt in an election year. To the police chief, it is a potential publicity nightmare. To the city attorney, it's a pain in the rear. To local property and business owners, it's a long-awaited cause for celebration. To the poor, it is an apocalypse. It is exile. It is an act of war. It is 14 police cars pulling up to a small string of plywood shacks and tents just to serve eviction notices. It is bulldozers trying to move in on structures while people are still sleeping inside of them. It is watching the homestead you built with your own hands out of the scraps and garbage other people threw away be snatched up and crushed by a roaring excavator against your will with no other place to turn in the richest country on earth. Poor people are not the problem. A society that isn't even satisfied with poor people living in shacks, but must also relentlessly attack and further displace them is the problem. In recognizing the authority of poor people, we have to listen to poor people. We have to hear homeless folks' firsthand accounts of how our cities are investing in expensive militarization directed against them instead of investing in the things that could save lives, like affordable housing and healthcare. But what would Isaiah say if he stood at that camp, that same camp on the banks of the Chehalis River in Aberdeen, surrounded by cop cars, construction equipment, and weeping, cussing homeless people? I think Isaiah would say, same sin, different day.
So if after hearing these excerpts, you weren't inspired, not just to get a copy of this book, but to get organized and to cry out and keep on working for justice, then perhaps God has hardened some of our hearts. I want to say a little bit about, I'm hoping that folks are going to send in and already are sending in questions, and folks that are in the physical space in New York City are thinking about your questions. There are other contributors to this book here that can also, follow along. But as we gather and as we and think about these questions that we have for this book launch, I wanted to say a little bit more about the organization of the book and how it came together. It is a not traditional, but still kind of a devotional. And there are 53 entries. It could be that we don't know how many weeks are in a year, or it could be that we're getting you started on one more week before you find your next. But indeed, the idea of this is ordering our lives around these words, our sacred texts and the sacred texts of our lives, of especially poor people, organizing together and coming together. And then if the 53 chapters aren't enough, each has at the end questions for reflection, ways for us to pray for each other, and really kind of a way of going through and using those. The way that the book itself is organized is into different seasons. As a movement, and that's indeed what we are, we live through a rhythm of themes, seasons that kind of organize our collective life and our work. And so we start the year off, or we start the fall off, or we start the spring off, whenever we're going to read this book, with the season of Jubilee. That's characterized by biblical stories and historical and contemporary examples in which every need is supplied, right? And so we can think of the different biblical texts and the texts of people organizing in our world today that are about this trumpet blast of liberation, this Jubilee, this release of slaves, this forgiveness and cancellation of debts, this paying people what they deserve, and this organizing society around the needs and the demands of the poor. And then the second season is struggle and lament. What we hear throughout our texts and throughout our movement is the struggle and is the crying out in pain and in sorrow of a world that does not have to be, but that is, and is destroying our lives. And so we have a series of different chapters and contributions that look at that lament. And lamentation and crying out is a huge part of doing this justice work. Then we go to the days of liberation, and we hear about, despite in the Christian story of Jesus being executed for being a revolutionary, that does not have the last word. Just like when we have folks who are crucified by poverty and racism and ecological devastation, that is not the end, but instead a way of people coming together and organizing. From there, we use a kind of motto and a slogan from our work of learning as we lead. So much of our sacred texts and so much of our movement work is about taking the experiences and the lessons of folks who have come before and who are organizing among us now, and making those parables a reality for the kind of political education and engagement and the raising up of generations of leaders. And then from there, we have the advent of revolution, the idea that what is birthed, that comes next, is a movement. And so hope that folks can, again, follow these. This comes out of years, decades of people organizing. And the folks that are contributing to this book come out of years, decades of experiencing the plight and the fight and the insight of poor and impacted leaders leading a movement for justice. It comes out of a new way, a different way of reading the Bible along organized poor people that says that we have to push back and battle for this Bible that says actually all of good things to the poor. Our colleague Willie Baptist from the Cairo Center says the Bible is one of the only forms of mass media that has something good to say about the poor. And yet it is used and twisted and turned to justify injustice and supremacy and violence. And so this is a powerful contribution, a powerful response, and a powerful, moving into the world with this cry for justice. So again, I hope that folks will get this book and keep on organizing and mostly get involved. And so I'm gonna pass it to Lauren Zehu, who's gonna facilitate some of the Q&A, and I hope that folks have the questions coming in.
Thank you to all of our contributors online and those of you who are joining us online. I'm doing my best to grab questions online along with questions in the space, but be patient with me. I know that there's so much for us to get to. And because I have the mic, I'm going to ask my question first, which is, so this book is called Reading the Bible. Well, the subtitle is Reading the Bible with the Poor People's Campaign. Can we talk more about how that's different than the dominant narrative that reading the Bible is discussed in the larger sense, if that makes sense? That's a y'all for. Yeah.
Is this working? Hi. Yeah, I'm Adam Barnes. I made a contribution to the book, and I work at the Cairo Center. I've been there about 15 years.
And I'm Sharon Rebar. I also am part of the Cairo Center and the Poor People's Campaign. I also made a contribution to the book and do a lot of the cultural work connected to both the Cairo Center and Poor People's Campaign. But I do have a degree in theology and ethics as well, if you don't know that. Yeah, so I can kick us off, and folks online can also jump in. But yeah, what does it mean to be reading the Bible with the Poor People's Campaign? I think that it's a way of reading that we've been working on for a number of years, and really, as you heard probably as people read through excerpts from their chapters, is really about starting with the struggle of the poor and dispossessed in this country and around the world, and how that starting in that space really opens up the reading of the Bible in new ways. And I think the reason it does is because the Bible is a text of poor people struggling, and so it roots us in where the text itself is rooted, which is a text of liberation, a text of struggle, and of people coming up against empire over and over and over again. And so, I think when we misread the Bible today, when it's read out of context, out of the context of these struggles, right? We can read a lot of different things into the Bible and what it's saying, and it becomes a text of empire. But when we root it back in these struggles, it just becomes so clear that what these texts are saying is, that God is calling for justice. God is calling for ending poverty. God is calling for, housing and food for all, right? And so I think, what it means to be reading the Bible with the Poor People's Campaign is recognizing that, the Bible is a text of movement building. It's a text of stories that have been told for centuries of people organizing so that we can fight back against empire and be about liberation.
Does anyone else have anything to say? I said that was amazing,
Well, I mean, one thing I would say is that empire requires the consent of people for it to work, and part of no matter who's in power, I think that they've always relied on religion in some way or another to gain that consent. And so part of it is recognizing that in any movement we have to engage in that battle. And first step is recognizing what those forces can do and how destructive they are, whether it's a sort of twisted sort of version of Christianity that justifies poverty, or it's an explanation of religion that says you don't need religion. Religion is a private matter. It's not a liberating force. And so once you make those connections and then you start to ask these questions, and look at the Bible from the perspective of how empire is building consent and how people resist, the Bible read through that lens is truly an account of poor people's struggles. And I think this book is just the latest version of that. So.
Thank you, Adam. I wanted to give a moment to any of our contributors online to see if anyone had anything to add. Okay, glad to hear it. In the event you have a question here, feel free to throw your hand up. But other than that, I'm going to move to the questions online. That's okay with everybody? Yeah. Okay, glad to hear it. So one of the questions that we got was about the difference in the way that the world uses justice versus biblical or righteous justice. And how, if those are different, and how they're different, and how you would explain that. Also, if we want to go to our contributors online first for this one, just to mix it up. I believe Carolyn was said by name.
Repeat the question, please.
It was the difference between the way the world views justice and righteous justice. All of those work.
Yeah, you'll hear the world talk about justice a lot. We're hearing it now a lot. They're not actually using the word justice, but when I hear people talk about their rights, not to wear a mask, for instance, it's my right, and not thinking about the community's right as well. They're really, in terms of just only thinking about themselves. It becomes very selfish. But righteousness, in the biblical sense, is more holistic. You're looking at not just what you want, but what is best for the community at large as well, for all of us, for the common good of all. And so that's what's missing, or the missing link between what the world or society sometimes talk about, or the secular world talk about justice, and what righteousness is in terms of the biblical definition. We're looking at, when we talk about righteousness in the biblical sense, we're looking at the common good of all, not that selfishness, but what is best for all of us. And so that is what my interpretation of it, because we are suffering through that right now with this pandemic, or people want to do their own thing instead of what works best for all of us to get through this pandemic.
Do one of our contributors want to?
So I love this question, both around what the Bible says justice is and defines it, and actually the definition of lots of words that we throw around, and what the Bible really says about them, right? So to get to the question of what is justice according to the Bible, I want to start with what is good news? What's evangelism according to the Bible? Because we throw around good news and evangelism, evangelion, the Greek word for good news, for gospel, a lot. And there's not one place in the Bible where it says evangelion, when it says good news, that is not connected to justice, to righteousness, to the righting of wrongs, to the reparations that are needed to lift from the bottom so everybody can rise. And I think what part of this distorted narrative that we were talking about is that we have taken and redefined for our own convenience, particularly to justify the inequality and injustice that those in power have, and have basically misdefined a bunch of these words. Again, when we hear about freedom and justice, as Reverend Carolyn was saying, so often it's about my individual rights to not be responsible to anybody, or that it's kind of the might is right. Those that have the power, that have the wealth to make decisions, must be blessed by God. It must be how they deserve to have all those cars and those mansions and those resources, and not what the Bible says, which is that if you really truly want to worship and honor God, that means you need to welcome the immigrant neighbor. If you really love and want to talk about what justice is, it means bringing good news. Good news isn't eviction. Good news isn't the cutting of people off of health care. Good news isn't saying we don't want an entitlement society where kids rely on government help. That's bad news. That's the language of empire. But what justice, what good news is everybody has the right to live, and abundance and beauty for absolutely everyone. I mean, part of my favorite parts of the Bible is where the poor are lifted up, filled with good things that everybody deserves, not just the bare survival things, but to thrive, to have beauty, to have luxury, to have rest, to have everything. That's what God wants. And anything short of everything is an abomination, anathema to God. And so therefore, when we define justice as limited, or when we define it as the justice system that puts people away behind bars for lifetimes, and we call that justice, when instead justice in the Bible is about everybody living to their fullest potential. I have come so that you may have life and have it to the full, everybody. That's the message. That's the definition of so many of these words, and we would do well to go back to our sacred texts, and to talk these out, because again, I am the one who led you out of Egypt. That's how God defines God's self. That's what's there, and that's what we should hear in our world today.
Yeah, no, I was just going to, lift up another little tiny bit in the book, and this comes from a chapter 2 that Salita Riley, one of our movement leaders, wrote, and she's putting this in context of Deuteronomy 15 and 2 Corinthians 6, and she said, put simply, God's economy does not include debt and poverty. Instead, it introduces practices to prevent it. This is where Deuteronomy 15 and 2 Corinthians 6 suggest hope. These passages offer the impetus to break down what stands between us and true freedom. God has a different reality in mind and calls us to work toward a society in which full life is possible. That fullness, I think, is what you were just saying, Liz, Reverend Liz. And we were actually reading this passage earlier today with a group of artists that are working on a compilation of artwork that will accompany this book. We have about 30 artists, musicians, and visual artists that are working on pieces that people can use in relationship to the book. And we have this open space where we read passages together and kind of lift up what stands out to us. And one of the texts, or one of the images that stood out to me as we read that 2 Corinthian text was weapons of righteousness that were countering kind of the weapons of empire. And just what that means too, and that those weapons of righteousness were about love, or about care, or about the fullness of life and being taken care of in that way. And so I was just reflecting on that as you were asking that question of what does justice look like, that really comes to life.
Thank you to all our contributors, and we have time for one more question. It can be you, go for it. One moment, let me get to you, but yes, it can definitely be you. Say your name and where you're from, if you don't mind.
Hi, I'm Nicholas. I'm from Indiana. I've been kind of in and out of the Poor People's Campaign for like 2 years. This is kind of an organizing question, like a practical question. I noticed when, you're speaking to a person, like trying to get them involved, there's a kind of cynicism and like this like ingrained like capitalist realism that there's like no way out. And I don't know if you guys have noticed anything like that would like help you like enter into that conversation to help people get involved.
Thank you, Nicholas.
I think Aaron Scott might want to answer that question.
I don't know. I just it's real. And I think it's true of many different kinds of people, right? Like it's because this is how our whole society operates. It's not just like, it's not just about people being mean or it's not even people who have enough and are comfortable, right? There's plenty of poor people who are so burnt and so stressed and so for concrete reasons singularly focused on their own survival because the society is not. So I think you gotta, this is I'm stealing this from Ruby Sales, but the way she put it that I find the most useful is to not, if you're really hitting a wall with somebody, sometimes you don't push, but if you think, in your spirit, like if there's room to push, if you think there is a soul in there who could be brought into this work, you don't start outside of their life, you start with their life. And the way Ruby Sales put it was asking that person, where does it hurt? Like for you, so where is that person struggling? That's the one that works for me. Yeah.
Thank you, Aaron. Do any of our other contributors, either online or in person, have anything to add there from an organizing perspective?
I mean, just quickly, the one thing I've seen transform people is I mean, talking, yeah, I mean, you couldn't like develop a relationship, but if you can just get people to be in a space with other people and hear how the people speak, that I think is really moving and can really change people's thinking and that experience, yeah.
I think just connecting to that, it's one of the reasons why in the Poor People's Campaign we have space in any event we do for testimony and lifting up our stories of what we're going through, because inevitably the more stories that we hear our own story, right? And so we talk about lifting up the 140 million poor and low-income people, and that many more of us that are one paycheck away, one healthcare crisis away, one emergency away. And I remember another Indiana colleague that was organizing said, I'd been trying for years to get my sister involved in the campaign. And then she came to this one event and someone testified and she was like, that's my story. And then she was like in it. And it was, he's like, but I've been trying to get you in for years. And, but it was in that moment that she heard her own story articulated by someone else that she's like, this movement is for me, right? And that being able to step into that and understand where it hurts. So Aaron was just saying, you know, like for one another, and how other people are coming together to do something about that hurt, right? I think will move people.
And I think for Christians, often that moment is called Pentecost, right? Where people are speaking in different words and speaking in different languages, but they hear themselves in it, right? And so I wanted to read just a little bit of a contribution from Idaline Bobet from her chapter, because she's talking about Pentecost and she's talking about that organizing spirit. And she says, in Acts 2, the Holy Spirit comes to and into the disciples of Jesus. The Spirit enables the disciples to speak in such a way that others, no matter where they come from or what language they speak, can understand. That same Spirit is at work today, and we can still feel the power and the unity of that moment. That Spirit is the power that affirms for us the worthiness we are so often denied, reminds us that we are beloved. It gives us the power to cry justice in the face of oppression, claim human rights as our inheritance, and grow our movement. When we cry out in protest, we hear, see, and feel the Spirit moving.
Powerful words, powerful work. I want to give all of our contributors a moment to give final thoughts as we wrap things up before Sharon closes with a song.
We're starting online?
We're starting where the Spirit moves. So I like to home personally, but you know, it's up in the air.
You know, I was thinking about the first question. No, I've just been sitting on it. What does it mean to read the Bible with the Poor People's Campaign? And I was just thinking, pretty much everywhere you go, what you're getting is reading the Bible with the Rich People's Campaign. And the Bible really is a contested territory, and we've got to be making a battle for that territory. And I think this book is making a really invaluable contribution to that. That's what I got.
Amen.
It's also very much an optional thing. You don't have to do it. So please, oh wait, sorry. Okay, moment of correction, clarification, it is mandatory, so.
I just really appreciate the endorsement from Valerie Carr on the back of the book, where she says, if you are inspired by the Poor People's Campaign, Retry Justice is a must read. It will inspire spiritual practice, scriptural reflection, and social action to transform your life and the world. So I think that these entries, I've been working through them myself, and as someone who is not only a trained historian, but also a spiritual director, there's a lot of good spiritual succor here for you. So make sure when you leave tonight that you grab a copy of the book and just anticipate and expect your life to change and your ability to change. If you don't want to start really big with the world, but to start with the little communities that you are a part of. And you'll be putting the book to good use.
I want to echo that and just say that the holidays are around the corner and you can knock it out tonight. So you can just be done with all of your shopping for the rest of the year. Just everybody gets a book. So, and then I also wanted on this idea of reading the Bible with the Poor People's Campaign, that, there are folks who lift up the reality, because you can't deny the reality that the Bible talks about that the poor are throughout the Bible, the poor are everywhere in the Bible. But not everybody sees and lifts up in the way that the poor are organizing in the Bible, and that the poor are taking up together and figuring out how to be part of the kingdom of God and make the kingdom of God possible. And that the poor are not just to be pitied or objects of charity or those kinds of ways that a lot of times people who spend a lot of time talking about the poor think about the poor in the Bible. And that this is very much reading the Bible because we are the organized poor and organizing poor, we are able to see that in those that we're reading, in the text, and pull that out in the text and make connections to the organizing work that we're doing today.
And I would only add that when you get your copy of the book, don't rush through it. Take time to really ponder it. I love reading books that make me think deeply and touches my heart deeply, or to give you some new insight, things that you haven't thought about. And I think this book will definitely do that. But don't rush through it. Take your time. It's got, at the end of every chapter, it's got a piece for you to reflect, some suggestions on things that you can read, and then for you to pray. And take time to do that, to really just let it sit with it before you move on to the next chapter. It's not like a novel. This is not a novel, but this is something that you want to ponder, you want to reflect, you do want to pray, and you do want to read, go deeper in the scriptures that's reflected here. So take your time and sit with this.
I would say when you get your copy, or your whole family gets their copies for the holidays, just encourage everybody to bring it to Bible study, and just bring it with you everywhere. I think that what's most useful to me about this book is how it really popularizes some of the work of the campaign, I think, in a way that can crack through spaces that maybe we haven't reached yet. I had a chance to use it at a Bible study I was leading this past few weeks, and it helped kind of catalyze conversations that otherwise would have taken a much longer time, I think, because the Bible is so important to so many people. You can't minimize that. So this is something that really speaks to something that, even if people are carrying around, distortion with their love for the Bible, if there's something there that really matters to them, and rather than coming up to somebody and saying, just throw all that garbage away, you can be like, I hear that that's real to you and real in a lifeline for you. Here's another piece of it you might want to think about.
Sorry, I know it's getting late, but I have to say, one of the other things that came out of this group of people that put this book together is something called the Freedom Church of the Poor, which is very much where this kind of discussion is alive every week, every Sunday at 6 p.m. on Facebook Live. Folks from all over the movement, many of the folks here in this book are sharing their insights from the frontline struggles and reading the Bible out of that perspective. And so this conversation is very much alive and ongoing, and so please join us there every Sunday. Including next Sunday, we're going to have the whole service focused on the book. So.
All right. Well, I'll say one last thing. I have two last things. One is, if you were inspired by the last quote I just read from Idaline, it's on the back of our newly minted T-shirts. It says, when we cry out in protest, we hear, see, and feel the Spirit moving. And it has her name. And on the front, it has We Cry Justice. And you can get this for a small fee, either if you're here in person or by going to the Kairos store, though they're not up there quite yet. They'll be up there in a matter of days. And so if you're tuning in online, please promote this idea and this book. And when you buy your 10 copies of the book, also buy your whole family T-shirts and sweatshirts. And then I want to close with another quote from a contribution from Corinna Gore, who's here in the audience with us, because I think it actually speaks very much to kind of a charge to us all. She's reading Jonah 2, and there's a part of it that says, the great Jewish philosopher and social justice activist Abraham Joshua Heschel taught that the prophets of the Hebrew Bible give us a God's eye view of the world. Most people see things according to measures that the powerful devise: the stock market, the gross domestic product, simplistic jobs reports. The systems causing the climate crisis are justified by these metrics. These systems are as legal and accepted as the wicked ways of the people of Nineveh. Our own tendency to flee from responsibility to change these systems is as mundane as Jonah's instinct to get on the ship and fall asleep at the hold. But this passage shows us that when God works with flawed messengers, uses human error to generate another chance at redemption. In the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, we often say that it's the rejected who are going to lead that revival. And so it is a call to everyone here, everyone online, and anyone that ever reads this book or gets involved in the work of the campaign, that indeed there is a movement growing in this country, and it needs everybody. And we all have a role to play. We all have a responsibility to play that role. And we will indeed move forward together and not one step back.
So we are going to close out as we began in song. And it is a charge to us, this song. It's a song written by the Peace Poets. And we have a little twist on it because we're doing twists tonight. But it says, your liberation is my liberation, and my liberation is your liberation. So let me hear the people say, let's get free, let's get free, right? And so as we heard this evening, that it is our charge to walk in justice. It is our charge to cry out, and it is our charge to get free together. So I'm gonna ask you to stand one more time. You'll catch on. Sarah and I are gonna get you started. That's right. That's right. My liberation is your liberation, and your liberation is my liberation. So let me hear the people say, let's get free.
Let's get free.
Let's get free.
Let's get free.
Your liberation is my liberation, and my liberation is your liberation. So let me hear the people say, let's get free.
Let's get free.
Let's get free.
Let's get free.
Oh, freedom.
Freedom.
Oh, freedom.
Freedom.
Freedom. It ain't free. You gotta fight for your rights now. Freedom.
Freedom.
Oh, freedom.
Freedom.
Oh, freedom.
Freedom.
It ain't free.
It ain't free.
So your liberation is my liberation, and my liberation is your liberation. So let me hear the people say, let's get free.
Let's get free.
Oh, let's get free.
Let's get free.
Your liberation is my liberation, and my liberation is your liberation. So let me hear the people say, let's get free.
Let's get free.
Oh, let's get free.
Let's get free.
Oh, freedom.
Freedom.
Oh, freedom.
Freedom.
Oh, freedom.
Freedom.
It ain't free.
It ain't
You gotta fight
free.
for your rights now.
Freedom.
Oh, freedom.
Freedom.
Oh, freedom.
Freedom.
Oh, freedom ain't free. Now this time you're gonna sing to one another. Your liberation is my liberation, and my liberation is your liberation. So let me hear the people say, let's get free.
Let's get free.
Oh, let's get free. Try that
Let's
again.
get free.
Your liberation is my liberation, and my liberation is your liberation. So let me hear the people say, let's get free.
Let's get free.
Oh, let's get free. Now
Let's
hear the
get
people
free.
outside here. Freedom.
Freedom.
Oh, freedom.
Freedom.
Oh, freedom.
Freedom.
It ain't free.
It
We
ain't
gotta fight
free.
for our rights now.
Freedom.
Oh, freedom.
Freedom.
Oh, freedom.
Freedom.
Oh, freedom ain't free. You gotta fight for your rights. One more. Freedom. Freedom.
Freedom.
Oh, freedom.
Freedom.
Freedom ain't free. You gotta fight for your rights now. Freedom. Oh, freedom.
Freedom.
Oh, freedom.
Freedom.
Thank you all. You know where to go get shirts and books.
And you know to join us on June 18th, 2022 for a mass Poor People and Low-Wage Workers Assembly and a moral march on Washington.